Hi, this is the presentation for project week number 2. This is my React project for Flatiron. Let me walk you through my application. First of all, let me show you how it runs. I decided to use Yarn package with a package called concurrently, and this runs my JSON server and my application at the same time. As you can see, I'm running 2 different ports. That starts my application. I'm running a JSON server to fetch all my data, and that is this right here. This is where I'm getting all my data. This is where I'm posting data inside cart items, and this is where I get my initial data to build the items that I have in my shop. Okay, back to the page. As you can see, my page has 3 main components. 3 pages is what I called it. It's got a home page, which is the one you're looking at right now. It's got a card page and a shop page. The shop page, well, right now we don't have any items. Well, this is displaying had items inside the shop page. If I make this bigger, you'll be able to see that we're in shop. Cart, I don't have anything in there yet, but if I add to cart, this gets updated, and I have an item in my shop. If I add that item again, my little shopping bag right here gets updated, and the cart gets updated to have a quantity of 2. I can remove, and that's basically my application. It's a simple application. I get to go from 2 hats to sneakers to jackets to women's, and finally to men's. Select items, click add as many as I want to my little shopping bag, and get to display them here and erase them. Now let's look at the structure of my application inside my components. I'm not sure if this is going to display the way I wish it did, but I got the router library, the browser router from React Router DOM, and I'm using router to render my app component. I'm sorry, I'm using router so that within my app component I can render my header, which is always going to display because it's not inside of the switch. And I have a switch that renders my home component, my shop component, and my cart component, depending on the route that it's matching. And so that's basically the basics of my application. You know, it's not incredibly responsive there. One of the things that I need to work on. But if I see the home component, localhost 3000, the home component has its own children components, and in this case, it's only one. There's a directory component that is rendering a bunch of menu items thanks to a function that I built inside that I will be showing in just a second. If we look at my shop component, this is similar to the home component. I am rendering a bunch of collection. Shop component is rendering a collection component, which is its children, and then I'm going and inside collection, I'm rendering a bunch of collection item components that are children of collection. And finally, if we add items to the cart, I see that again my switch inside app is rendering cart, cart is rendering cart items. So cart is just a containing component that renders a list of cart items, and it's a very simple simple structure, but it is packed with little small components that I'm using across the application. All right. Now that you've seen how my application works on the browser, I can now go to my code and show you how the functionality actually works. So the first thing is, how do I render all these pictures and these components inside the homepage, right? So I have, like I told you, I have inside my app is pretty much where all my where all the state lives and pretty much where all the information lives, so that it can rain down to the children that need the information. And if there are children that share information or depend on certain data, then I want it to be in the higher order, on the higher level component, so that it can be shared between those the children components of app. As you can see, I'm importing the components that I thought I would need, or that I need to render inside my app. I have the header, the home, the shop, and the cart. I also imported switch, which is going to allow me, give me the functionality to switch between routes for each of these components. And I also downloaded the route from React Router DOM so that I can use it to route my components. I'm also using hooks to set state and use effect to listen to all the changes that my application is going to go through. Okay, as you can see here, I have set some state variables that, as I walk through the code, you're going to be able to see how it works. Let's see the render method of my application first. In here, I have a simple div with the class name of app, and I'm displaying the header component, which is always the same. I got all my headers, or all my components inside the components file. And the way I decided to organize this was, I made a file for each component with the component file, the JS, and their specific styles. That's how they're all organized inside my application. And then I have pages also inside a different folder called pages, just to keep it organized. All right, so we got the header that's always displaying because it's not inside of the switch. And we got the switch, which recently I learned that it allows me to avoid using exec, because switch basically just renders the exact path without having to do this. If my routes were not inside a switch, I would most likely have to put exact here so that I match the exact route and not just a partial route. Because since this all have the root route, that means that if I didn't have the exact keyword there, I would be matching this, and I would be matching that, and I would be matching that. That means that home will always be displayed, and either shop or cart will always be displayed next to home. If the route is shop, then home will be matched there, and then shop will also be displayed. But we don't really want to do that. We just want to display shop or cart. And that is what the exact word gives us here, but switch also gives that functionality without using the exact. Excuse me. Okay, so how do these components look like? Let's look at the first component, which is the home component. That's the first component you see when you go into my application right here. The home component. Let's look at those individual components that are my menu items. So if I go to my home page, you're going to see that, well, I don't need this part right here. I'm not using state in this component. And okay, this is where I import my directory component, which is the one that I'm going to be displaying inside my home component. This component is the one that is going to be rendering all my menu item components. So like you can see, set collection ID comes all the way from the parent component of my home component, which we said was app. If I go back to app, set collection, collection ID is part of state. I got this right here, this collection ID, and it lives here because my shop component will also use it to display specific information depending on the collection ID. So I'm passing the set collection ID, which is a callback function here, so that when I click on one of my components, so that when I click on one of my menu components, I send a specific ID for hats, for sneakers, for jackets, for women, for men, so that shop can use it to build the correct list of items so that we can browse through them. Let's go back to home. Okay. So back to home. Home component renders a directory component. If we look at that, directory component is right here. Directory component is using specific data in this folder. This data has the information about the menu items. I have hats, the image URL, and those are the ones you're going to be seeing here. That's the image, the name. I have the ID, and I was going to do some dynamic routing with this, but at the end of my application, I didn't end up using the link URL to match specific routes. But this was supposed to be used with a property called match to be able to dynamically route nested routes. But I didn't do that. So I got the title, the image, which you are going to be seeing displayed over here. It's the title, and that's the image. Some styling. Okay, so how does my directory component display all those items? This is basically the same functionality that I have for most of my components. This is what I feel comfortable with right now, and so that's what I've been using. I'm sure there might be better ways to do this, But this is the one that I feel comfortable with because it's the one I've been practicing to do. So I usually create a function that I'm going to call inside my component. If I have to render several components at the time with different IDs and different and pass them different information to each of them, I want to be able to map through some kind of data. In this case, it is directory. It's this one right here, sections data, and I'm mapping through sections data. And for each section, in section data, go back to directory. For each section in section data, I want to create a menu item component. And these menu item components are going to be receiving, well, a key ID, which I decided to be the key ID, the index, but it could very well be the ID of each individual item. At the time, I just thought about using the index, but I could have very well used the ID of each section instead of index. So this would have been something like section.id, and that would be a specific key. Hopefully that doesn't do anything to the application right now. Let's go check that it still works. Everything seems fine. Oh, sneakers, jackets, women's. Okay, nice. Okay, so again, it's just a function that maps and creates menu items and passes props on each creation. It passes props a different section ID, obviously, depending on the iteration. And here I'm just destructuring each section so that I can pass the the values of every section as props to the menu item. This right here is a callback function that will be used by menu item to set the collection ID so that I can then pass that down to shop and display the correct shop. So I call this function right here, I execute, that renders all my items right here, and that's what creates them. Okay, so let's look at the children of my directory component. Since my directory component is rendering all these menu items, we're going to go look at menu item. Menu item is using, and this is what I was going to do with dynamic routing that I was researching about. Don't feel too comfortable with it, so I'm not going to go into detail about that. But basically, this is a high order component, and high order components are just functions that take other components as arguments, and they return a completely different. They return the same component but with more functionality. It's like a powered up component. The reason I did this with router is because I wanted to have access to location, match, and history to be able to route nested locations or nested routing. At the end, I only ended up using match. Actually, I ended up using just history so that I can link each item to the shop component. And the shop component is the one responsible for rendering all the items that I have in my shop. So I want to click on each item like I do here. I want to click on each item, and it's going to take me to the shop component. but I actually liked it better the way I had it because this is only showing shop, but I actually wanted to show shop hats. So I'll bring back the link URL, and link URL is this part right here that I showed you just now. And really, link URL right there as it is, it really doesn't do anything in when it comes to the routing. It's just there to be displayed on my browser so that people can see, well, which where am I, right? Even though it's obvious because there's a title here and here, I want to be able to display hats over there because that's basically the hats page. So I am going to put that here, link URL, and hopefully this still works. If I go back here, hats, okay, that's linking to that. Sneakers, nice. Jackets, and like I said, this is basically just static because it isn't really matching the URL, but basically I wanted to use this next to match to be able to match the route, the exact route, but I didn't create different pages for hats or sneakers. All these is just they're being rendered inside my shop component, but not as a page for hats or sneakers. It's just I'm creating lists, not components. Okay, so that is the menu item. I know this application is a little bit long, so I'm going to try to move a little bit faster. So that's what this menu router was supposed to do, to use it here. And all I'm doing here is this is how I create my menu item. I have the image URL in here, interpolated in the URL, background image property in an inline style. And also I have I have a div here that on click handle item ID, and handle item ID sends the ID back to the app to know, to set the ID, the collection ID, so that it's passed down to shop. Let's see that process. So this is my callback. It comes all the way from app because that's where the information that I want to change lives. So I have my app component with a state of collection ID, and then I have a set collection ID that I pass down to home, all the way down to the directory, then down to menu item. And when it's triggered, all that it does sets the ID to be the ID of each specific menu item that I select, collection that I selected here. And thanks to that, my shop component knows what to display. Thanks to the collect ID, I can see the components receiving their props right here. Well, this is my app. Right now, it's rendering the home component. If we go to shop, I can see, well, right now it has sneakers selected. Okay, I see my shops, and I can see all the props that I'm passing down to shops right here. I got a collection, and this collection ID was collection 2, ID 2. So my shop component, if I look at my db.json, I see that Just a second. Let me just get organized over here. Oh, okay. So those are my card items. I'm sorry, I got a little confused there. Okay, so I see that the hats have an ID of 1. The ID of 2 is for sneakers, and then there's all these sneakers that I'm building components with, 3 jackets, and on and on. So again, make this smaller again. Very well. So that is the this is showing the collection of sneakers because that is the I'm sorry of it shouldn't be that. Oh, okay. Well, so it's actually showing. Um, I'm passing props. I'm sorry. I'm passing props, and sneakers has an ID of 2. The collection ID I set it up to be 2, so that's why sneakers is the one being selected. Although I'm passing all the elements from the app component, I'm only showing sneakers there. Now, right here, if I look at it, the collection ID is 1, and if we look at collection 1, that is hats. Very well. Going back to the code, we can take a look at the apps, right? Or we're in apps. So shop takes a collection ID to know which collection is supposed to render. It takes collections, which is all the collections that live here in state, and right at the beginning, that is a empty array, and every time my application renders, the use effect, this first use effect renders, and this array of dependencies, it's basically saying, well, every time there is a change in the data resource, which really, honestly, there's never going to be a change there because it's the same data resource. But I put this here so it doesn't create an infinite loop, because when this gets ran, set collection to data, collection gets updated, and that causes a re-render of use effect, and then this gets updated again. So every time collections gets updated, this runs again, and on and on. So the way you stop that is by setting up, I guess this is like a limit, just an array with dependencies that listens to changes in specific data to render the use effect. So don't run use effect unless this one gets triggered. So this one just basically just run once. It populates my collections, and then now I have collections in state so that I can pass down as props to my shop component. The other thing that I have here, as you're going to see, is an add to item, add item to cart, and this is a callback function that I'm also passing down. Let's see where that is. Add item to cart is right here in line 71. And this is the whole functionality responsible for basically adding the items to cart, like its name says. I had to work my way around some asynchronous code because I was getting some out of order functionalities. I guess I can use that word. So things were out of sync, basically, and it wasn't behaving. My application wasn't behaving the way I wanted. So I had to try several things here and there, and that's because of the way asynchronous JavaScript works. I was having some code run before my my functions. Some of my functions were done doing what they were supposed to be doing. Okay, add item to cart, I have, and like I said, that's responsible for adding items to cart. Components, that's all the props that I'm passing down to shop. And if we go to shop, we can see that shop has a similar function to the one that I had in my collection and my directory component. And this is basically, again, grabbing a collections that is being passed as props, is filtering the collections by ID. Uh, Originally, I have this function in here, which is smaller, looks nicer, but this function renders all the collections. I wanted to be able to render just one by specific ID. So I'm filtering by ID here. I'm adding all the components that match this condition to the new array, and then I am using that new array, right, which is the result of this part right here. I'm mapping through that array, and I'm building new components with each collection in there in that array. And lastly, I'm just calling the function here, which is the method that you saw me use in the directory component. So this is, I kept it there because eventually I might want to toggle back and forth and try to fix this part so that at some point it renders all the collections. But that is basically how my shop component works. And now we can look at its children, which is the collection item, the collection component. Shop, go to components, collection. We look at collection, we see that I'm importing collection item component, and again, I have a function that renders the collection component for every item inside the items, the filtered items list. Again, I'm passing the index so that I can use it to filter by index. I just want to display 4 to not make it too big. I'm just displaying 4 elements. That was to be able to display them nicely in the screen, the way you see them right here, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm saying, well, if the index is less than 4, please don't create more elements. I mean, if it's bigger than 4, or as long as it's less than 4, then create the elements. Otherwise, don't. And okay, so that is what my application does. All right, so let me just move around here. Okay, I had a little bit of a hiccup there because this was collapsed, and I couldn't see where I was using this function. I was pretty sure that it had to be there because I'm creating it there, and you're seeing my components created over here. So yeah, just call it again, call it there, create 4 of each, and that's how it works. Now, the add item to cart. Let's see how that works. Because add item to cart is a function that I pass from the parent component, which is app, only to be able to use it inside my collection item component. If I go to my collection item, my collection item component, well, built itself with the props that it was passed. Apparently not using ID. So I got an image, a price, a name, a quantity, which are all being used. Image, name, price, and quantity. What's the quantity? Oh, so yeah, my information initially, it just doesn't have a quality. They just don't have a quality or quantity property here. So I had to create it. If it wasn't there, I had to create it and then start adding one to it every time I clicked on the component. But I'll show you that in just a second. Okay, we said we were in collection. Nope, we were in collection item. Collection item. So what happens here? The user is going to interact with this part. Here are my collection items. And the user is going to click on a button to be able to add it to the cart. So that button is right here. It says add to cart. I have an event and I have an event handler, which is a function that basically builds data with the information from that specific card or collection item, and it sends it back to the app component through the callback function, and it sends it back right here, right? It calls that callback function that was passed as a prop right here, and then app receives it, item to add. It checks if the item exists inside. It checks if the item exists. So basically, I'm just saying, well, find that card item, and if it finds it, this will end up being the item that it found. If it doesn't find it, then this is going to be end up being undefined, right? So this value, I just needed it to see, well, did it find it? And if it did, right here, then I can do something with that. What I want to do is, well, I want to create a new array with all the cart items that so I want to go through cart items, which is the ones that are in there already. I want to, for each item, I want to return the cart item. I want to return. Okay, I want to return either that, or that. So this is the cart item with a quantity. So basically, if the cart item name, right, matches the item to add name, which is whatever I picked here. So I clicked, I send that item name, and I would have that because I grabbed it there. So if the name in the cart item that I'm iterating through at that point is equal to the item to add dot name that I know exists because it's running this part. I'm saying, well, if that is true, so that means that it exists inside the cart. If that is true, then it means that I already have a certain amount of that item in there, and I don't want to add it again to the list. I just want to go inside and add to the quantity, to just update the quantity to be whatever it's in quantity inside that object plus 1. If this doesn't match, then just return the card item. That makes sure that I return all the card items that do not match this condition unmodified, and that I only modified the one that matches this condition. And that gives me a new array of updated card items with the one card item maybe updated, or or the card items that were not updated. So just updating that one card item that matched the name. And then why do I create this array? Is just because I want to be able to set that to the new card item value. So that new array becomes a new card item value, which triggers, which means that the card component renders different information. So click, click, click. My card item renders different information, which is, well, it found the name that it matched the one I clicked. That means that was already added in there. Let me remove. Let's do this again. This one, so it went through it. It didn't find where's the else? So it did not find that item, right? That item did not exist inside the card items. So this was false, which means that it didn't update any quantity because it wasn't there. Instead, it created, so instead it used that item that was passed to add it first to the database. Right here, this part actually adds to the database, and this part right here is item. This is, well, calling this function right here, which is built right here, pass the item that was just posted thanks to this fetch, and then so this function uses that item to update what is inside the card items component. So this is everything that's in there plus this new item that didn't used to exist there. And now this is a new array. Card items is a new array. Everything that it had plus the posted item thanks to deconstructing. And basically that's what happens every time that I click on just one item. It hits that part of my code. It hits a post request. That's what it hits. But if I add the same item again, we can see that I have two here. It didn't add it. It didn't post it to the database. Instead, it just updated the quantity. That was this part right here, where I used a patch method. Well, I mean, this is for the front end. So this is what you see displayed over here. And the patch is for my database, so that I can update it in the backend as well. And so I also do quantity plus 1 of that item. And this is basically how I execute my fetch. So I fetch to that URL and with a specific ID. And this is my configuration object, which says, well, update the quantity of the item with that ID. Quantity to be plus 1 of the item with that ID, the existing item with that ID. And so I also have here if the item exists. I also check if it exists, and then I do the rest. Okay, so I know this is getting a little long, but hopefully we can get through the rest. We went through how I'm adding to the file, and I'm also updating this value right here. And there's one more thing, or a couple of things, where there's the remove. The remove happens in the cart component. If we go to cart component, okay, I'm passing down a function called remove from cart all the way from app that has also information. My cart component is well, rendering the cart items. And so if I go to cart item, there's a remove button right here that that when is clicked, trigger this this event handler, and this event handler, its only purpose is to remove from cart. So I pass the ID of the item to the parent, which removes remove from cart, grabs it, the ID. It uses it to interpolate it here, so we know which item we're talking about. Oh, we know what item we're talking about. We're fetching to that specific position to this item, and all we want to do is use a delete method to fetch. And I'm saying, well, fetch to that URL with that ID, right? And then delete that specific object with that ID. And basically, this is what happens in the back end, and this is what happens in the front end. Right after I update my backend, I call this function. Which also uses that ID to update the current card items list so that it can render, so that card items can render something else. In this case, well, nothing there because I removed all of them. And so I create a new array again with different card items, and I set that new array to be updated card items, which displays whatever gets displayed here. And that is the functionality for remove item. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is the header. The header has a little component. We look at the header. The header has a little card icon component right here that requires a specific value so that it updates. This is the card icon component. I wanted to be able to click and update to blah, blah, blah. And that is happening thanks to this state variable, which also lives in app. Right here, item count. Item count is being updated every time. Let's see, every time my component loads, every time item count is updated, and item count is updated and over here. And count. Okay, so I'm saying, well, render this use effect every time there's a change in item count. So when my component first renders, it does a fetch to the card items resource. Card items resource is this one right here. And then it sends that data to the items list. And right after it's done doing that, I set the item count to whatever that renders. Oh, actually, set item count is updated over here. And I say every time there's a change in card items, I want to run this use effect and set item count to calculate items in cart. Whatever that returns, that's what's gonna calculate my count. So this function is right here, and this is basically just reducing the amount, reducing the quantity of each card item to one single value, which is item count. So if the quantity is non-existent, then it doesn't do anything. If it's 1, then accumulator becomes 1. The next item has maybe 2 as quantity, then it becomes 3, and on and on. And that's how I update my little shopping back right there. Okay, guys. Well, thank you for listening to all that. Sorry if I got stuck several times. It's a long application for a beginner, but I hope that I was able to explain to you properly the way my application works. I hope you were able to follow along with the code, and that's it for now. Thank you.